A flight attendant mocked a black family mid-flight. Seconds later, the father made sure his arrogance was the last thing he ever served, and what happened next will leave you speechless. He thought a baby's pain was a joke, but every scream has a witness. Subscribe if you believe the innocent should never bleed for another man's cruelty. The baby's soft cries pierced the stillness of the first-class cabin, thin and high-pitched like the whine of an engine just out of tune. Dr. Marcus Elian shifted in his leather seat, cradling his 1-year-old son, Noah, close to his chest. Noah's cheeks were flushed, his tiny fists clenching and unclenching as he writhed in discomfort. Marcus reached for the teething ring tucked into the side pocket of the seat back, brushing his fingers against the bottle of warm milk he'd prepared just before boarding. He pressed the toy gently into Noah's hand, offering a soft hum to ease the baby's distress. Across the aisle, flight attendant Darren Voss paused mid-step, his gaze locked onto the child with veiled contempt. His polished shoes reflected the muted lights above, but his expression carried no such softness. He tightened his grip on the service card, the muscles in his jaw twitching as the cries continued. Marcus didn't notice the stare at first. He was too focused on his son, on calming the rhythmic whimpering that had begun to draw annoyed glances from nearby passengers. He murmured gently, "You're okay, little man. Just breathe with me." His voice was low, controlled, almost methodical, like someone used to holding chaos at bay. Darren exhaled through his nose and rolled the cart back into the galley. "Some people think money buys manners," he muttered to himself, barely loud enough to be heard over the hum of the engines. He glanced back once more. The man with the baby didn't look like trouble. Polished dark suit, sharp profile, calm hands. Yet there was something in the way he held himself, something too precise, too composed. It irritated Darren. He despised that brand of quiet confidence, the kind that didn't beg for attention but demanded it anyway. "Cabin secure," Darren said curtly into the intercom as he returned to his duties. Marcus finally relaxed as Noah's cries softened to hiccuped whimpers. He gently rocked his son, turning his gaze out the window. The sky stretched endlessly in every direction, clouds like ghostly mountains drifting beneath the aircraft. For a brief moment, peace returned, but it didn't last. The intercom beeped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude." "You may now move freely about the cabin," Noah stirred again, this time fussing louder. Marcus sighed inwardly, checking the time on his watch. Still over 3 hours to go before landing in Eastmere. He gently adjusted the baby's position and reached for the bottle, pressing the service button as a precaution. He'd need some warm water soon. Darren saw the light above Marcus's seat flash but made no move to respond. Instead, he busied himself serving drinks 2 rows down, exchanging polite laughter with the silver-haired businessman and ignoring the blinking signal with practiced ease. Marcus waited patiently, then pressed the button again. Nothing. From behind the curtain, Darren muttered to another crew member, "First-class fathers with fussy babies. Think the world owes them extra service." He didn't even glance toward the signal light. Back in his seat, Marcus's calm was beginning to fray. He leaned slightly forward, catching the eye of a young man in the adjacent row, someone who had been watching the entire exchange. The man quickly looked away, pretending to adjust his headphones. Noah began to cry again, this time louder. Marcus adjusted the bottle, trying to soothe him. "Shh, I've got you," he whispered. But the bottle was too cool. Noah wasn't interested. His tiny hands pushed it away, lips trembling. The curtain parted. Darren strode over, holding a pair of metal pliers loosely in one hand, the kind used to repair service trolleys or seat tray hinges. His smile was too quick, too wide. "Is there a problem here, sir?" His tone carried a sweetness laced with something sharper. "Yes," Marcus replied evenly. "My son's bottle needs a bit of warm water. I pressed the call button a few minutes ago." Darren glanced at the button, still lit, Oh, must have missed it. His eyes didn't apologize. He glanced down at the baby, then back up. Maybe he just needs to learn to be quiet. Marcus's expression didn't change. He's teething. Darren bent down under the pretense of examining the tray latch. Seems fine, he murmured. His hand, holding the pliers, moved far too close to Noah's tiny hand gripping the edge of the seat. There was a faint metallic click. Noah let out a piercing shriek. Marcus's entire body tensed. He immediately pulled his son's hand toward him, inspecting it. A thin red line had appeared across the baby's thumb. Blood beaded up slowly, impossibly small, but unmistakably fresh. Darren straightened. "Careful, sir. Wouldn't want your child getting hurt." He gave a theatrical shrug and walked away, casually spinning the pliers once in his hand before disappearing behind the curtain again. For a moment, Marcus couldn't move. The cabin was quiet again, as if holding its breath. Noah whimpered in his arms, the tears returning, but this time Marcus barely noticed. He stared at the curtain, eyes narrowed. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, wrapping the injured thumb with a napkin from the seat back. The wound was shallow, but it wasn't an accident. He was sure of it. He was absolutely sure of it. Marcus looked up, scanning the cabin. The overhead camera blinked in standby mode. He followed its line of sight, noting how the angle just barely missed his seat. A blind spot. Darren knew exactly where it was. That realization chilled him deeper than the air conditioning ever could. Someone behind him coughed. Another passenger chuckled softly at something on their tablet. The world kept turning. But Marcus's mind was already shifting. No longer just a concerned father. The instincts of a scientist, of a man who built systems designed to repair broken signals and damaged brains, began to analyze every detail. That injury was not chance. It was calculated, covered by performance, done in plain view, yet just outside scrutiny. He felt the weight of his son in his arms and the sharp bite of something colder than fear. This wasn't turbulence, he whispered to himself. This was a message. And as the seatbelt sign dinged softly overhead, Marcus knew something with terrible certainty. Sometimes, danger doesn't announce itself with a scream. It whispers through routine. Darren Voss bent over the service cart, the overhead bins rattling faintly as turbulence rolled through the cabin. His fingers tightened around the metal pliers in his hand, not part of the standard service kit, but something he'd used earlier to force a jammed galley latch. He hadn't returned them to storage. His jaw clenched as the soft wail of a child rang out again from first class. The same child. The same man. He turned sharply. Marcus Ellion was gently bouncing his 1-year-old son, Noah, on his lap, whispering soothing words and brushing the boy's fine hair back with steady fingers. The baby's cry, startled by the sudden jolt of turbulence, had already begun to fade. Marcus reached toward the seat pocket to retrieve a small teething toy, but before he could settle, Darren was standing over them. "I need warm water for his bottle," Marcus said, his voice low and even, though the weariness in his eyes betrayed deeper layers. "He's teething." Darren didn't respond right away. His lips twisted into what might have been a smile if not for the sharpness in his eyes. "We're attending to the rest of the cabin." "You'll have to wait," he replied, his tone clipped and dismissive. Marcus nodded once. "Understood." He looked away, hiding the sting of that familiar condescension, one he'd encountered countless times, too subtle to call out, too sharp to ignore. Darren lingered longer than necessary, adjusting a tray table that didn't need adjusting, before moving down the aisle. Behind him, the hush of the cabin swallowed everything, except for the quiet hum of the engines and the occasional cough from another passenger. Marcus tried not to think too hard about Darren's presence. He focused instead on Noah, on keeping his breathing steady and his hands gentle. But Darren returned sooner than expected. "I'll check your tray," Darren muttered, already crouching toward their row. Without invitation, he reached across Marcus with the same pliers still gripped in his hand. He knelt down near the meal tray, pretending to fiddle with the hinge at its side. The metal glinted under the cabin lights, long, industrial, and out of place in such close quarters. "You need to control your child, sir," Darren said, still facing the tray but projecting his voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Marcus bristled. He glanced at the tool in Darren's hand, then at Noah, who had begun to quiet. The baby reached instinctively toward his father's sleeve, his tiny fingers curling around fabric, trusting and unaware. "I'm doing my best," Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. Darren leaned in further. His hand, holding the pliers, hovered suspiciously close to Noah. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. Marcus noticed the way Darren's wrist tensed, the angle of his elbow, the subtle shift of his foot, small signs that signaled a man about to act under a mask of service. Then it happened. A quick flick of Darren's wrist, disguised as a movement to adjust the hinge. The pliers passed too close, far too close, to the baby's hand. Marcus saw it, but not in time. Noah whimpered, his fingers jerking back. A thin line of crimson bloomed across the soft pad of his thumb. Marcus's breath caught. He instinctively reached down, lifting Noah's hand for a closer look. The cut wasn't deep, but it was fresh and unmistakable. A thin, red line stretching across delicate skin, deliberate in direction, specific in placement. Darren was already standing upright. "Looks like your tray's fine," he said lightly, brushing non-existent dust from his sleeve. Then, with a glance down at the father and child, he added, "Let me know if you need anything else." His smirk was faint but unmistakable. Marcus's world narrowed to that smirk. His heart thudded heavily as he stared after Darren, who was already retreating down the aisle, moving with practiced ease, as if nothing had happened, as if the injury were just coincidence. He shifted Noah gently, wrapping a cloth napkin around the child's hand. His movements were mechanical. The thoughts racing through his mind moved faster than his body could react. Anger, disbelief, a rising fury held in check only by the instinct to protect. He looked toward the overhead security cameras. Too high, wrong angle. He knew their blind spots. Some corners of the cabin would remain unrecorded, unaccounted for. Darren knew that, too. That's why he'd chosen that moment. Across the aisle, another passenger cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But no one spoke. No one intervened. Perhaps they hadn't seen. Or perhaps, like Marcus, they were trying to make sense of something too surreal to confront outright. Marcus cradled Noah closer, rocking slightly in his seat, eyes locked on the pliers still visible at Darren's hip. The tool gleamed with a metallic sheen, innocent in appearance yet stained now with meaning. He wasn't afraid. He was calculating. Darren's words rang in his ears. "You need to control your child." They weren't a reprimand. They were a warning, a display of dominance masked in protocol. Marcus leaned back slowly, watching Darren as he laughed with another crew member near the galley, casual and unaffected. The ease of his demeanor made the act even more chilling. This wasn't negligence. It wasn't the result of stress or turbulence. It was something colder, something intentional. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, steadying himself. His thoughts sharpened. This was no longer about a delayed bottle or disrespect. This was about something deeper, something dangerous hiding behind a smile and a uniform. He adjusted the napkin on Noah's hand, careful not to press too hard. The moment had passed, but the evidence remained. A thin red line across a baby's thumb, and a father who would not let it be forgotten. The line between negligence and cruelty had just been crossed. Marcus's fingers moved swiftly but with delicate precision as he pressed the folded napkin against Noah's tiny thumb. Blood, fresh, startling red, seeped through the fabric almost instantly. His heart pounded behind a wall of practiced calm. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now, not with eyes watching. He looked up, scanning the cabin, calculating sightlines like a scientist in a lab. The overhead cameras were installed above every first-class seat, but their range wasn't absolute. The small aisle between his seat and the galley where Darren had leaned in remained in a camera-blind spot. Convenient. Too convenient. Across the aisle, Darren Voss stood with a casual posture, chuckling with another attendant near the service cart. His expression was composed, even friendly, like a man telling an amusing story. The pliers, Marcus was sure of it, had not been returned to the galley bin. They were either on Darren's person or tucked somewhere nearby. Marcus's mind split between urgency and restraint. If he made a scene now, he'd look unhinged. But if he waited too long, the evidence might disappear. He pressed the service button embedded in his armrest. The light blinked once, twice. No response. Darren didn't even glance in his direction. Noah whimpered softly, his wide eyes glossed with confusion more than pain. Marcus cradled him gently, whispering soothing words. "It's okay, little one. Daddy's here." But his voice was taut, each syllable laced with quiet rage. The napkin was now soaked red. He tucked it inside a Ziploc pouch he pulled from his carry-on, an old habit from lab work. Preserve, label, protect. From across the cabin, a voice broke the silence. "Need a hand, sir?" Marcus turned. A tall, middle-aged man with a discreet bearing approached from 2 rows back. His tone was neutral, eyes calm but sharp. He wore a navy jacket, nothing flashy, but carried himself like someone used to command. Marcus hesitated, then gave a slight nod. The man stepped closer and leaned in. "Name's Elias Trent, retired field agent. I noticed the blood." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're not imagining things, are you?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "No. He grazed my son's hand. A pair of pliers. Not an accident." Elias's jaw tightened. "That tool isn't cabin standard. They don't carry those unless they're doing mechanical checks mid-flight, and even then, it's rare." Marcus exhaled. The validation steadied him. "I think he's watching us. Cameras won't show the angle. I need to document everything." Elias nodded, lowering himself into the seat beside Marcus as though simply striking up a polite conversation. "Then let's start," he said, pulling out a small notepad from his coat pocket. "Time of incident? 14 minutes ago." "Just after turbulence," Marcus replied. He motioned subtly toward the folded napkin. "I preserved the blood." Time-stamped mentally, Elias scribbled quickly, then glanced toward the galley. "That's Darren." He's signaling someone. Marcus followed his gaze. The glass panel above the service counter caught a faint reflection. Darren's hand was raised in a half gesture, subtle but practiced. A short wave, then a finger point toward Marcus's row. "He's setting the narrative," Elias muttered, "probably telling the captain you're unstable. Disruptive. Might even say you threatened him." Marcus's throat tightened. "That's exactly what I feared. He's not just negligent, he's strategic, knows how to hide behind protocol." Elias leaned back slightly, voice low. "Then don't give him reason to escalate. You need to document quietly. Don't press the service button again. Start with still photos. Position of the cart. Attendant layout. Do it naturally, like a dad taking baby pics." Marcus nodded, retrieving his phone. He flipped the camera and began recording in low light mode, sweeping slowly past Noah's seat, capturing the blood-streaked napkin pouch, then the galley behind. Each motion was calculated, casual on the surface, but precise beneath. Elias continued scribbling. "I'll keep visual tabs. If he approaches again, I'll intervene. But I'm not crew. They can brush me off if it escalates." Marcus hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Elias shrugged faintly. "Because I've seen this before. Men like him count on silence, but silence is where justice goes to die." Just then, a faint buzz from the cabin intercom startled them. It didn't speak, only cracked once with static, then went quiet again. Elias looked toward the cockpit door. He's laid the first brick. He's told the captain something. Probably just enough to get eyes on you. Marcus looked at Noah, who was finally drifting into uneasy sleep. The pressure in his chest built with each second. He was being framed, slowly, subtly, and the truth was just out of reach. He whispered, more to himself than to Elias. How do you fight a lie told before you even open your mouth? Elias responded without looking up, his pencil still moving. You armor the truth before it leaves your lips. Marcus turned to stare out the window. Distant thunderclouds rippled across the horizon, lightning strobing through folds of gray. Inside the plane, the lights dimmed slightly, an automatic adjustment. But to Marcus, it felt like a warning. He had entered a space where evidence mattered less than perception, and perception was being carefully twisted behind his back. Still, he refused to be pulled into panic. His thoughts sharpened. If the captain thought he was a threat, he'd be treated as such. The next step would be isolation or accusation. He had one chance to collect enough proof before that happened. He held Noah closer, his voice nearly inaudible. We're going to make it through this. And somewhere behind them, Darren's low chuckle echoed faintly, carried by the filtered hum of the cabin. When a lie is prepared in advance, truth must gather its armor. Marcus remained seated, one hand cradling Noah against his chest, the other wiping the last streak of blood from the baby's thumb with a napkin. The wound was small, but unmistakably intentional. Just as Marcus's eyes flicked toward the aisle in search of assistance, the curtain at the galley parted. A lanky figure emerged, Flight Attendant Milo Wren. He moved with hesitant steps, shoulders tight with tension, eyes scanning the rows with visible discomfort. The captain had sent him, clearly, as the messenger of peace. But Milo's youth betrayed him. His uniform was crisply ironed, his name tag gleaming, but his face carried the look of someone caught between duty and uncertainty. I've been asked to de-escalate the situation, Milo said, voice wavering. His gaze dropped to Noah, then flicked to Marcus's steady eyes. Sir, I need you to remain in your seat and stop causing distress among the passengers. Marcus looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. I haven't left my seat, he said evenly, and the distress wasn't caused by me. Milo swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He shifted his weight awkwardly. It's protocol. I need to ask that you stop pressing the service button repeatedly and keep calm for the remainder of the flight. Did you see what your colleague did to my son? Marcus asked, his tone soft but edged with steel. I wasn't there, Milo stammered, glancing over his shoulder, where Darren Voss lingered near the galley, arms folded and smirking faintly. Marcus exhaled quietly, then reached toward his wrist. With a discreet flick of his thumb, he activated a small voice recorder embedded in the strap of his watch, one of his own designs, originally created to record field research without drawing attention. A soft chime vibrated against his skin. He gave Milo a tight nod. Understood. Milo hesitated for a second longer, then turned and walked away, clearly relieved to escape the pressure. As the attendant disappeared behind the curtain, Darren took his place, stepping into the aisle with theatrical slowness. He leaned close, lowering his voice to a whisper only Marcus could hear. Unfit fathers like you always think science makes them saints, Darren hissed, the scent of coffee and bitterness clinging to his breath. But guess what? No one's going to believe you. Marcus said nothing, his eyes locked on Darren's with quiet defiance. You want to file a report? Darren sneered, glancing down at the bundled napkin in Marcus's hand. You'll file nothing. You people never win against us. The words hung in the air like a poison. Marcus felt them pierce something deeper than anger. They echoed with history, with unspoken assumptions, with a threat dressed in the uniform of entitlement. The phrase lodged in his mind like a splinter, not for its venom, but for its certainty. Darren wasn't afraid. He was confident. Too confident. A few seats away, Elias Trent shifted. He stood slowly, stretching as though retrieving a magazine from the overhead bin. But as he turned, his hand brushed the inside pocket of his blazer, where a slim recorder, tucked inside a glasses case, blinked red. He caught Marcus's eye and gave the faintest nod before sitting again, flipping the magazine open without reading a word. The plane rocked gently as it entered a pocket of turbulence, the lights above dimming briefly. Outside, dark clouds swelled across the horizon, their edges lit by occasional flashes of lightning. Rain streaked the windows like claws dragging against glass. The intercom crackled overhead with the captain's voice announcing mild turbulence ahead, asking all passengers to remain seated with belts fastened. No one really listened. The cabin had its own storm brewing. Darren remained standing near Marcus's row, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Occasionally he would glance around at the other passengers, then back at Marcus, as if daring him to move. Marcus stayed still, not out of fear, but calculation. His hand gently rocked Noah, whose breathing had begun to slow into the light rhythm of sleep. Every moment of stillness sharpened Marcus's awareness, of the hum of the engine, the soft shuffle of a passenger turning pages, the whisper of lies preparing to spread. Darren leaned forward again, close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of his breath. "You think someone's going to save you?" he said, his voice low. "You're on a plane. 10,000 feet above anyone who cares." Marcus turned slightly, his voice barely audible. "I'm not looking to be saved." Darren tilted his head, confused. "I'm building a record," Marcus added. Before Darren could respond, another rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. A bright flash lit the cabin for a brief second, casting long shadows across faces. Several passengers gasped, more from the tension than the turbulence. The lights flickered again before stabilizing. Elias stood once more, pretending to adjust the air vent above his head. As he did, he subtly angled his phone toward Darren, capturing the man's posture, his proximity to Marcus, and the venom curled in the smirk at the corner of his lips. The plane felt smaller than ever, the pressure not just from altitude, but from the weight of truth pressing against silence. Every look became a line of dialogue, every breath a potential trigger. Darren's voice dropped again, one final attempt to provoke. "Your type never makes it far. Sooner or later you snap." Marcus didn't blink. "You just mistook silence for weakness." Darren scoffed and stepped back, but the edge in his confidence had dulled slightly. The way Marcus remained composed unnerved him. It didn't fit the story he wanted to tell. The angry father, the unstable man. This wasn't going to be easy. Outside, the storm raged, flashes of electricity illuminating the vast ocean of clouds below. Inside, tension sat thick as fog. Back in his seat, Elias opened his magazine and muttered under his breath, just loud enough for his recorder. "Observation. Subject Voss is agitated, aggressive, escalating. Target remains calm." The seconds dragged on. Somewhere at the rear of the plane, a passenger coughed. Another rang the attendant bell. But in this small section of first class, time had shifted. It slowed, stretched, and tightened like a coiled spring. Marcus watched Darren disappear back into the galley. He didn't relax. Not yet. Outside, another bolt of lightning streaked across the sky. Inside, the quiet cracked with something heavier than sound. Sometimes the storm outside only mirrors the one already brewing within. Darren moved swiftly and silently, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the aircraft's carpeted floor. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the gentle hum of engines was the only background music to the growing unease. Passengers sipped drinks, read magazines, or closed their eyes to rest, unaware that tension was tightening its grip like a storm cloud forming silently above. Darren crouched beside Marcus in Noah's row, his smile forced, eyes sharp. "Just checking the child's seatbelt," he said casually, reaching over without waiting for a response. Marcus tensed. Something about Darren's approach felt off, too rehearsed, too deliberate. He shifted Noah gently in his arms, trying to place himself between his son and the flight attendant's hands. But Darren moved with intent, brushing Marcus's forearm aside under the guise of adjusting the buckle. In one motion, Darren's hand clamped around Noah's, and Marcus saw it, the flash of metal. The pliers again, pressed into the soft skin of his child's tiny fingers. Noah let out a sudden, sharp cry. It was not the whimper of an uncomfortable baby. It was a cry that cut through the cabin's calm, a sound that spoke of pain and violation. Marcus reacted before his thoughts could catch up. His hand shot out, grabbing Darren's wrist with a force that surprised even him. The pliers trembled in Darren's grip as Marcus's fingers tightened, pure instinct overriding restraint. "You're hurting him," Marcus growled under his breath, his eyes locked onto Darren's. Darren staggered back as if struck, wrenching his arm free with a dramatic flair worthy of theater. He stumbled into the aisle, clutching at his throat, gasping. "He attacked me," he shouted, his voice rising in pitch and volume, drawing every eye in the cabin toward him. Gasps broke out around them. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A drink tray clattered as a passenger's hand slipped in shock. Marcus remained seated, his chest heaving, Noah wailing against his shoulder. Blood stained the child's blanket, bright, undeniable red. Marcus's mind raced. He knew the optics. A man standing over a crying child, a flight attendant calling assault, the infamous pliers now resting in his own hand. He slowly opened his palm, staring down at the tool. It was slick with crimson along the edge. His grip tightened, not in violence but in stunned realization. Proof and danger combined in one terrible object. Elias Trent stood. The retired federal investigator's voice sliced through the charged air. "I saw everything," he declared, calm and loud enough to carry. He stepped into the aisle, his stature commanding attention. "The flight attendant caused the injury. That man," he pointed squarely at Marcus, "was protecting his son." Some passengers murmured in confusion, others nodded hesitantly. A few reached for their phones. Darren, breathing hard, held his neck as if it had been crushed. "He grabbed me," he cried out, eyes darting to the cockpit door. "He's violent. He's a threat to the crew." Milo Wren, the junior flight attendant, appeared from the galley, eyes wide with panic. "What's happening?" he asked, but Darren seized the moment. "Call the captain. We need to divert." "Now," Darren barked, limping slightly for added effect. "He's out of control." Milo hesitated, glancing between Darren and Marcus. "Should we restrain him?" "No," Elias said firmly, stepping closer to Marcus and blocking the path. "You'll do no such thing." The tension pulled taut like a wire between two towers. Milo's hand went to his radio. "Captain," he said shakily into the mic clipped to his collar. "Possible passenger threat?" Requesting protocol clearance for diversion, Marcus didn't move. He didn't yell. Instead, he looked around, at the faces watching, judging, guessing. He adjusted Noah in his arms, whispering gently to the child, even as blood continued to soak the edge of the blanket. "I want medical attention for my son," he said clearly, evenly, to no one and everyone. "That's all I've asked for. And you'll provide it before you put your hands on me." Darren leaned against a seat back, clutching his side now as though nursing fresh wounds. But his eyes betrayed the act. They flicked nervously toward the pliers still in Marcus's possession. His face had gone pale, his act beginning to crack. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is your captain. Gentlemen, return to your seats immediately. We're monitoring the situation." A low rumble followed, turbulence, subtle but present, shaking glasses on trays and making overhead bins rattle faintly. Passengers whispered. One man muttered, "What's going on?" Another woman asked, "Did he say the baby was hurt?" Eyes turned once more to the child. The blood wasn't hidden anymore. Noah's bandaged thumb was soaked red, the stain spreading across the white gauze like a silent accusation. One passenger gasped audibly. "He hurt the child," someone whispered. In that single moment, the room shifted. Sympathy swayed. Doubt crept into previously neutral expressions. The pliers glinted under the overhead lights, not as a weapon in Marcus's hand, but as evidence, as truth made visible. And Darren knew it. His jaw clenched, his posture tensed. But it was too late. The story he'd tried to spin was unraveling thread by thread, and everyone could see it. When truth bleeds, no lie can stay spotless. Darren's fingers were still twitching from the shock of being caught mid-act, the cold gleam of the blood-tipped pliers now glistening faintly under the overhead cabin lights. The air was thick with whispers, pockets of passengers murmuring in confusion, some glancing nervously at Marcus, others at Darren, unsure where the truth lay. One voice sliced through the tension like a blade through canvas. "You'll stop this now." Elias Trent's voice was steady, measured but firm. He stood slowly from his aisle seat, his posture upright and commanding, his eyes locked on Darren with quiet authority. His voice didn't shout, but it carried with the clarity of someone used to being obeyed. "I'm a retired federal investigator," he said, holding up his ID, flipping it open just long enough for passengers to glimpse the seal, then tucking it away as if he already knew its presence was enough. "I witnessed everything. This stops now." For the first time, Darren faltered. His eyes darted from Elias to Marcus, then toward the cockpit door, still locked, still silent. The smugness drained slightly from his face, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Marcus remained seated, cradling Noah tightly in his arms, the baby's bandaged hand now visibly stained a darker red. The faint scent of blood mixed with cabin coffee and the sterile tang of recirculated air. Marcus set the pliers down slowly on the seat beside him, his movements calm but calculated, as though each gesture had been rehearsed in his mind a dozen times over. "I want to speak to the captain," he said firmly, directing his voice toward the intercom near the galley. "Now." Silence. The cockpit door remained shut, sealed behind policy and protocol. Then a sudden jolt. The aircraft lurched violently as turbulence struck, shaking the cabin like a leaf in wind. Cups toppled. A tray clattered to the floor. Overhead compartments rattled. A child further down the aisle cried out, and passengers gripped their armrests, gasping as oxygen masks jolted but did not drop. It was in that moment of chaos that Darren lunged. "No!" he shouted, pushing past a stunned passenger, his voice tinged with desperation. "He's dangerous. He has a weapon." His arm stretched out toward Marcus, reaching not for the man, but for the pliers that had now fallen between the seats. The metal clinked faintly as they slid under the edge of a passenger's bag, almost out of sight. Marcus reacted instinctively, twisting his body to shield Noah, whose frightened whimper barely rose above the cacophony. His other hand braced against the seat in front of him. Darren's shadow loomed, but before contact could be made, another force collided with him. Elias. With surprising speed for a man his age, Elias stepped between them, intercepting Darren mid-lunge. His arms locked around the flight attendant's upper body, pinning him back with a grunt. "Not this time," Elias growled through clenched teeth, his voice low and brimming with restrained fury. Darren struggled, but Elias's grip held fast. The plane jolted again, forcing them both against the galley wall. The chaos had swallowed the cabin whole. Then, over the intercom, the captain's voice finally crackled to life. "Gentlemen, return to your seats immediately." It was the kind of instruction that usually brought relief. This time, it barely slowed the storm. Passengers stared in wide-eyed disbelief. The air was no longer simply tense, it was electrified, each second stretching with unbearable weight. Somewhere in the back, a man muttered, "What is happening up there?" And then someone gasped. A sharp, clear gasp that drew every eye like a magnet. The source was a middle-aged businessman in 3B. He stood halfway out of his seat, pointing toward Marcus, not at his face, but at what he held. Or rather, what he protected. Noah. The baby's hand, once wrapped in a white napkin, now showed a vivid stain blooming through the fabric. The red was unmistakable, fresh, stark, undeniable. "He hurt the child," the man said, voice shaking with outrage and realization. A hush fell, eerie in its completeness. For a beat, no one moved. Then the tension shifted. Where moments ago, Marcus had been the question mark, the possible threat, he now became the victim, the protector, the father shielding his wounded child from something monstrous. Eyes turned toward Darren with dawning suspicion. The mask of professionalism he had clung to was unraveling by the second. No words were spoken, but the energy changed, from doubt to sympathy, from hesitation to quiet resolve. Darren sensed it too. His breath came faster. His arms stopped struggling. In the corner of the cabin, someone quietly whispered, "Check the cameras." Another replied, "That baby's bleeding. What more do you need?" Milo Wren, still standing near the galley door, looked stricken, his youthful face pale and unsure, his eyes darting between the restrained Darren and the silent cockpit. The storm inside the cabin had broken, but it left behind clarity. Marcus gently rocked Noah, his own breathing shallow. Every part of him trembled, not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline. He knew this wasn't over, but for the first time, the tide had shifted. Sometimes justice hides inside the storm's roar, waiting for silence to speak. The wheels of Flight Ravelin 309 screeched against the tarmac at Huron Airfield, jarring every passenger from the silence that had consumed the cabin since the turbulence subsided. The descent had been swift, tense, and unscheduled. No welcome message played, no apologies were offered. Instead, the aircraft's doors opened to a line of uniformed military personnel waiting with unreadable expressions and firm stances. The captain's voice came over the intercom, clipped and formal. "Remain seated. Security is boarding the aircraft." Marcus didn't flinch. Holding Noah close to his chest, he adjusted the baby's blanket to conceal the now heavily bandaged thumb, its gauze darkened by slow, persistent bleeding. He didn't need to say anything. His silence was a shield. His eyes, however, were blazing with restrained fury. Darren Voss was the first to speak when two armed officers entered the cabin. "There he is," Darren pointed with unearned confidence, his voice loud enough to carry through the stunned silence. "That man assaulted crew. He grabbed me, became hostile. He's dangerous." Marcus didn't rise. He looked straight ahead, unmoving, while Noah stirred softly against his chest. The officers hesitated, their gaze flicking between Darren's outstretched arm and the composed man holding a child. "I'm requesting immediate medical attention for my son," Marcus said, his voice low but authoritative. "Before anything else, this child needs treatment." "Sir," one officer began, his tone uncertain, "we're responding to a flight disturbance report." "You'll have your chance to speak." That was when Elias Trent stood, calm, collected, every inch of his stature demanding attention. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and carefully removed a small recorder. "I suggest you listen to this before making assumptions," he said. "It contains the audio from the moment Mr. Voss deliberately injured this child." He handed it to the lead officer, who took it with a frown. The device played. Darren's voice, sharp, hostile. The unmistakable snip of metal. The cry of an infant, sudden and pained. A gasp from the cabin, caught in real time. Darren's composure broke like glass. "That's edited," he barked, his hand suddenly trembling. "He must have tampered with it. That isn't admissible. This is all a setup." "No," came a shaky voice behind him. Milo Wren. The younger attendant stepped forward, his face pale. He looked down as if the weight of his words might crush him. "He told me to back him up," Milo said quietly, "but it was his fault. He cut the baby." Gasps broke out from a few rows back. One woman covered her mouth. A businessman stood slightly, then sat back down, unsure of how to react. Darren spun around. "You little traitor," he snarled, and then, without warning, he lunged. Milo barely had time to stumble backward before the soldiers were on Darren, pinning his arms with practiced precision. He fought wildly, teeth clenched, feet kicking. "You're all blind. You're falling for his act." Marcus finally stood, holding Noah tightly. The baby whimpered, sensing the renewed chaos. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence was a rebuttal to every lie spoken. The captain appeared at the front of the cabin, looking haggard and pale. His eyes darted to Marcus, then to Elias, and finally settled on Darren, now restrained and breathing heavily through gritted teeth. "Remove him," the captain ordered flatly. As the soldiers began escorting Darren down the aisle, he twisted his head around. His eyes locked on Marcus, no longer triumphant, but burning with something deeper, more dangerous. "You'll pay for this," Darren hissed as he was dragged away, his voice low and venomous. Marcus exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy but his gaze steady. Around him, whispers began to fill the cabin, soft, nervous, unsure of where truth ended and danger began. Yet, in Marcus's heart, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. He had survived the first assault, cleared the first storm, but storms didn't just pass. Sometimes they circled back. When truth wins too soon, the guilty plot in silence. He took a pair of pliers and sliced into a black baby's tiny thumb, watching blood drip as if it meant nothing. But when the father rose, silence filled the cabin. Justice had finally taken flight. If you believe no act of evil should go unanswered, hit subscribe now. Marcus sat rigidly in the back of the military transport vehicle as it rolled across the rain-soaked tarmac of Huron Airfield. Beside him, Noah lay nestled in a wool blanket provided by one of the base medics, his tiny body rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. The baby's hand was still wrapped in the makeshift gauze Marcus had applied hours ago, stained pink with dried blood. Each bump in the road sent a fresh ripple of anxiety through Marcus's chest, but he kept his face composed, refusing to let fear surface. He had to stay calm, for Noah and for what was coming next. Inside the base infirmary, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over white walls and polished tile floors. Doctors in navy blue scrubs moved with practiced efficiency, but when they saw Marcus step in cradling the child, everything slowed. A young military doctor named Dr. Kellen Bray, mid-30s with steel-rimmed glasses and a scar beneath his chin, gently took Noah from Marcus's arms. "We'll take good care of him, sir," Kellen said, his voice low and serious. "Please, wait here." Marcus nodded silently, his eyes never leaving Noah until the examination room door clicked shut. Elias Trent stood beside him, arms crossed, scanning every face in the infirmary with the instinct of a man who had spent years predicting danger before it struck. His voice, when it came, was firm but not unkind. "You need to prepare yourself," he said. "This is far from over." Marcus exhaled through his nose, jaw tight. "I know. They're going to try to bury this." "They already are," Elias muttered. "Did you see how fast the company had lawyers at the tarmac?" Before Marcus could respond, the infirmary door swung open. Dr. Bray stepped out, his gloves spotted with faint traces of red. "He's stable," he reported, "but the injury, it's not consistent with an accident." The tears too clean, too deliberate. It shows a calculated pressure, repeated application, not a slip. Marcus felt a strange relief and anger collide in his chest. "Then it's not just my word anymore." "No," Kellen confirmed. It's evidence. Moments later, a small group of men in tailored suits entered the infirmary. They wore Aerosable-issued security badges and the forced politeness of men used to cleaning up messes. One introduced himself as Grayson Kint, legal advisor to Aerosable's internal affairs. His voice was smooth, practiced, like a salesman who never used the same pitch twice. "Dr. Elian, let me begin by expressing how deeply sorry we are for what happened on board Flight Ravelin 309, Grayson began, extending a business card Marcus didn't take. "Our company values all passengers, and we want to resolve this swiftly, for your sake, and your son's." Marcus said nothing, waiting. Grayson pressed on. There was clearly a misunderstanding. Long flights, crying infants, stressed attendants, it can lead to unfortunate moments of tension. We'd like to extend a generous settlement and avoid any unnecessary escalation. Elias stepped forward, his expression cold. "He's not interested." Grayson's smile faltered. "I'm sorry. And you are?" "I'm the man who recorded your employee cutting a baby's hand," Elias said flatly, "and I've already sent backups to 3 separate sources." Grayson's face hardened. His partner, a younger man named Jory Penn, leaned in with a warning tone. "Dr. Elian, you have a lot to lose. Your research contract, your reputation. If this goes public, there's no guarantee the narrative will favor you." Marcus turned slowly, eyes locking onto Jory's with surgical precision. "Let me be clear. I'm not here to protect my name. I'm here to protect my son. And your narrative ends where his pain began." He pulled a slim tablet from his bag and tapped the screen. A soft chime signaled a successful file transfer, copies of the audio recordings uploading to his encrypted research network, unreachable by any standard legal interference. The lawyers hesitated. They weren't prepared for a man who'd already thought 3 steps ahead. Before they could regroup, a military officer stepped into the hallway, Commander Renford Hale, the man in charge of Huron Airfield. Grizzled, mid-50s, and with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen far too much bureaucracy, he walked directly to Marcus and extended a firm hand. "We've reviewed the situation. The injury confirms deliberate harm. As base commander, I've authorized a full incident report. It will be sealed and submitted to federal aviation investigators." He turned to the Aerosable lawyers. "These men are under my protection. You'll receive no further access unless cleared through official protocol," Grayson stammered. "But, Commander, surely the company has a right to—" "Not here you don't," Hale snapped. "Your employee harmed a civilian child. You're lucky you're not in cuffs." The corporate men backed off quickly, their forced composure beginning to crack. Marcus remained still, letting their silence speak volumes. Later that evening, Marcus sat quietly in a chair beside Noah's cot. The baby stirred lightly, bandaged thumb curled against his chest. The room was quiet, save for the occasional beep from a heart monitor. Elias stood near the window, watching the silhouettes of helicopters crossing the darkening sky. "They're going to retaliate," Elias said quietly. "Not just Darren. The company. You've wounded more than a man. You've wounded a machine that hides behind uniforms." Marcus stared at his son for a long moment, brushing a hand over the child's hair. "I know," he whispered. He rose slowly, shoulders squared with the quiet strength of someone who had already decided the path ahead. As he stepped toward the door, the light caught the glint of metal, Noah's ID bracelet, and something inside Marcus anchored with conviction. He looked back once more before they stepped into the corridor, his voice calm but unshakable. Justice, once awakened, cannot be silenced back to sleep. The footage playing across the screens was cropped, shaky, and damning. It showed Marcus Elian's arm swinging forward, Darren stumbling back, clutching his neck with exaggerated distress. No sound, no context. Just a carefully chosen frame to feed the narrative. News anchors recited Aerosable's official statement word for word, calling the incident regrettable. insisting that the airline had initiated a thorough internal review while protecting the privacy of its staff. Darren Voss, the man who had sliced open a baby's thumb with a pair of pliers, was placed on paid leave and shielded from the media behind legal walls. Meanwhile, Marcus watched his name unravel across every platform. He sat on the couch in Elias's apartment, Noah asleep on his chest, while clips of pundits debated his sanity, speculated about his temper, and dragged his credentials through the mud. "They didn't even ask for my side," Marcus said quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. Elias, standing by the window with arms crossed, responded evenly. "They never do when truth is quieter than scandal." The consequences came fast. The research lab at his university suspended all operations tied to his neural regeneration project. An email arrived from the ethics committee, cold and formal. "Due to the ongoing public controversy surrounding your actions aboard Flight Ravelin. 309, we are placing your contract under review." Marcus's hands trembled, not with rage but with helplessness. He had designed medical breakthroughs to restore damaged nerves, rebuilt hope for paralyzed veterans, and now, because of a lie magnified by silence, he was being erased. Gasps turned into stunned silence. The judge gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "That is your right. The court recognizes your contribution." Marcus sat down again, his heart strangely calm, like the sky after a storm. Beside him, Elias's lips curled slightly in approval. "You're not just closing the door," he murmured. "You're building a better room on the other side." Weeks later, a large press gathering took place at the modest yet elegant headquarters of the newly formed Alien Institute. Cameras panned across sleek exhibits and digital displays detailing in-flight passenger rights, misconduct protocols, and whistleblower protections. At the center of the main hall, encased in a pressure-sealed glass box with museum-grade lighting, rested the infamous object that had started it all. The pliers. Blood once stained their edge, but now they were polished, the gleam under the lights unnerving. A small plaque beneath read, "The cost of silence is too high. Speak, act, protect." Marcus stood nearby, speaking with a small group of students from a local aviation program. Noah, now walking, held Elias's hand at the edge of the exhibit, fascinated by the polished case. Milo, in a dark blazer, guided a reporter through the timeline of the case, his voice steady, stronger than it had ever been before. He had accepted a full-time position as the Institute's whistleblower advocate, his role clear: protect the voices too often buried in fear. Elias had accepted the role of Director of Investigations without hesitation. "If you want to rebuild the sky," he'd told Marcus during the offer, "you start with the people looking up at it." As the sun dipped beyond the trees, casting long shadows over the quiet property, Marcus carried Noah in his arms through the side doors and into the garden. The child's head rested gently on his father's shoulder, soft breaths warming the fabric of Marcus's shirt. His steps slowed as they approached a bench overlooking the nearby lake, where the evening light turned the water into glass. He sat, letting the silence speak louder than any courtroom verdict ever could. Marcus gazed down at his son's hand, small, healed, a faint scar just barely visible along the thumb. A memory stirred in his chest, not with pain, but with quiet pride. That scar wasn't just a wound. It was a warning to the world and a promise to others. Justice had come, not as vengeance, but as balance, as something rebuilt from the ashes of trauma. And in this balance Marcus found peace, not just for himself, but for those who would never know his name but would someday fly safer because of what he had done. He glanced up. A plane drifted silently across the evening sky, untroubled and distant. Some wounds close, but they leave behind the map that leads others to freedom. He scarred a child for life, never imagining the same tool would seal his fate. Subscribe now if you stand for the powerless and believe justice always returns to its sender. The approaching sirens howled in the distance, weaving through traffic like hounds catching scent. Red and blue lights flashed between the trees lining the road, growing brighter with each second. Unbeknownst to Darren, the rescue was no coincidence. Elias had warned Marcus of possible retaliation and insisted on installing a discreet tracking device on his vehicle. Marcus had resisted at first. He hated paranoia, but now he was grateful for the precaution. The squad cars arrived in force. Doors swung open, boots pounded pavement. 4 officers surrounded the scene, weapons drawn but cautious. Marcus raised his hands, stepped back slowly, and nodded toward the struggling man beneath him. "He's armed." "The weapon's on the ground," Marcus said, drenched and breathing hard. An officer scooped up the pliers carefully, frowning at the dried blood still visible on the ridged edge. Another cuffed Darren, who was now howling in protest, spittle flying from his mouth. "It's all fake. They framed me. I'm the victim," Darren screeched as they dragged him to his feet. One officer, a sergeant by the looks of his badge, turned toward Marcus. "You all right, sir?" Marcus didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the pliers being sealed into an evidence bag, then to his own hand, shaking slightly, not from fear, but from release. The pressure had broken, but the crack had not spread. He was still standing. He stepped forward and gently placed his palm on the evidence bag before the sergeant zipped it shut. "Those were used on my son," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "They're more than a weapon. They're a story." The sergeant nodded grimly. Just then, Elias's car pulled up. He stepped out in a black raincoat, the collar turned up, expression sharp. He scanned the scene with a practiced eye, walking past the flashing lights and muttered police chatter. When his eyes met Marcus's, something unspoken passed between them: relief, pride, and the silent recognition that a war had just ended. He stopped beside Marcus and looked down at the bloodied pliers now sealed in plastic. "He tried to break you," Elias said, his tone as steady as ever, though his gaze carried weight. Marcus exhaled deeply and met his old friend's eyes, the storm behind them finally starting to fade. "But instead," Marcus replied, "he completed your story." Then he looked at the van, at the rain, and at the sirens fading behind him. The worst was over. "Every scar," Marcus added, "is proof that truth fought back." The courtroom was hushed as the jury filed back into their seats, their expressions solemn, almost burdened. Months of testimony, evidence, and emotion had led to this moment. Dr. Marcus Ellion sat beside his attorney, hands folded, gaze steady. Beside him, Elias Trent remained a silent pillar, ever observant, while Milo Wren sat a few rows behind, nervously wringing his hands, the cuffs of his shirt damp with sweat. "All rise," the bailiff called out, and the room stood. The judge, a middle-aged man with a lined face and silver-rimmed glasses, looked over the courtroom before nodding toward the foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a tall man with a gravelly voice, stood. "We have, Your Honor." The silence thickened. "We find the defendant, Aerosable Airlines, guilty on all counts: gross negligence, falsification of internal safety records, and fostering a hostile and abusive in-flight environment." The gasp that swept through the gallery felt like a pressure release. The room came alive with murmurs, reporters scribbling, camera shutters clicking softly like a distant thunderstorm. Marcus didn't move. His body remained still, but inside, his chest burned, not with anger, but with a release so deep it almost hurt. He felt the weight of the courtroom's gaze, but his eyes were on the judge now, waiting for the next step. The judge nodded. "This court orders Aerosable Airlines to issue a formal public apology within 7 days. Additionally, a compensation fund totaling $118 million is to be established for all verified victims of in-flight abuse or misconduct within the last decade. Independent oversight will be appointed to ensure the fund's integrity." A soft gasp escaped Milo's lips. He looked at Marcus with quiet disbelief. But Marcus wasn't finished. When asked if he intended to accept his portion of the compensation, well over $7 million, he stood slowly and faced the court. "No," he said calmly, his voice carrying without effort. "I'm redirecting it toward the creation of a foundation, the Alien Institute for Ethical Aviation and Passenger Safety. The goal is not only to protect, but to educate, investigate, and reform." He moved through the house in silence, every creak of the floorboard amplified in his mind. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water but didn't drink it. Instead, he opened the drawer beside the fridge, retrieving a compact taser. He had trained with it during his earlier research work abroad, a habit that had returned quickly after the incident. Just in case. Then came the alert. A soft chime from his phone, a notification from the home security app. Garage sensor, motion detected. Marcus froze. He tapped the screen. The camera feed came up, blurry in the low light. Something, or someone, was shifting just outside the garage door. The movement was erratic, a brief shadow flitting near the lock mechanism. He moved quickly but silently, stepping through the hallway toward the side entrance. His hand tightened around the taser. His thoughts raced. A journalist? A vandal? Number? The scraping pattern on the feed, too calculated. Too deliberate. He reached the side door and pressed his back against the frame, slowly twisting the handle. The night air spilled in, crisp and quiet. Crickets chirped in the distance. The fence rustled. Then came a soft scrape, metal against metal. Marcus edged forward, heart pounding, flashlight in his left hand, taser in his right. He rounded the corner toward the garage and swept the beam across the ground. Nothing. No movement. No figure. Only silence, thick and waiting. Then, near the fence, he spotted it, faint scratches around the garage lock. Fresh. Precise. But the intruder was gone. He took a step closer, pulse still thudding in his ears. As he examined the lock, a gust of wind knocked a loose rake against the wall, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Marcus spun, taser raised, but again there was no one. Just shadows. He stayed there for a moment, eyes scanning the perimeter, breath held tight in his lungs. Only one sound remained, the faint rhythmic noise of something metallic being dragged across concrete. It was far off now, fading. He backed toward the house, locking the door behind him. His jaw clenched. Darren was no longer behind bars, and now Marcus knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sometimes vengeance doesn't knock, it breathes quietly, waiting for courage to open the door. Marcus Ellion's hands gripped the steering wheel as he turned onto Archer Road, the courthouse just 15 minutes away. The sky was overcast, casting a dull gray hue over the city, a fitting backdrop for the weight pressing on his shoulders. In the back seat, a folder containing critical testimony rested beside a worn stuffed giraffe, Noah's favorite toy. Marcus glanced at it briefly, drawing a breath to calm the storm inside him. He didn't see the van until it was too late. A white delivery van swerved violently from a side alley and cut directly across his path, tires screeching. Marcus slammed the brakes, his car lurching as the seatbelt snapped against his chest. The world narrowed into tunnel vision. The van skidded sideways, blocking the road completely. His instincts screamed. This wasn't random. The driver's side door of the van flung open, and a man emerged, wild-eyed, hair unkempt, clothes disheveled and stained with sweat. It was Darren. In his right hand gleamed a familiar shape, those pliers, the same pair that had once sliced into Noah's tiny thumb, now held with manic intent. Darren's eyes locked onto Marcus's, and his lips curled into a twisted grin. "I told you I'd finish this myself," Darren spat, his voice rasping like gravel, laced with fury and desperation. Time slowed. Marcus didn't panic. He didn't scream or fumble for his phone. Instead, he moved. He'd survived darker corridors during his fieldwork in war-torn regions while documenting neural trauma. There, he had learned that hesitation could be fatal. Now, he used it. Marcus kicked the door open hard, metal meeting bone as it crashed into Darren's knees. The pliers flew from Darren's hand, clattering onto the wet asphalt, spinning once before coming to a rest, blade facing the sky. Darren screamed and stumbled backward, grabbing at his leg in shock. Marcus stepped out quickly, his heart thundering in his ears. His left arm, still healing from the torn ligament, swung forward with purpose. He slammed his shoulder into Darren's chest, knocking him against the van's side. Adrenaline dulled the pain. Marcus twisted, using the same arm Darren had once mocked to force his attacker down, pinning him to the pavement. The world snapped back to speed. Darren writhed beneath him, screaming, "You set me up! You're all in on it. This was a trap." Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, soaking them both. Marcus's breath came in harsh bursts, every nerve firing with urgency, but his voice remained low and steady. "You made your choice when you cut a child," he said, pressing Darren's arm to the ground with enough force to hold, not maim. "This is where it ends." "He told me to cover for him," Milo said quietly into the mic. "He said no one would believe the father. He said, 'We make the story, not them.' But I saw it all. He hurt that baby." On purpose, the room erupted. Flashbulbs fired like staccato bursts of thunder. Journalists shouted questions. One of Aerosable's PR agents tried to interrupt from the aisle, but the audience shouted him down. In that moment, the tide turned. The cameras rolled, the story spread like wildfire, and Darren Voss's name shot across every screen as the symbol of systemic failure. Aerosable issued a reactionary statement within hours, but it fell flat. The evidence was too damning, the pliers too real, the child too wounded. But the victory was fragile. That night, as Marcus returned home, his phone buzzed with a security alert. His garage motion sensor had been triggered. The footage was inconclusive. A faint shadow, a metallic glint, a sound like scraping metal. Elias reviewed it frame by frame and said nothing for several minutes. Then he looked up at Marcus. "Keep the doors locked tonight." Marcus nodded silently and walked to Noah's crib, watching him sleep. The press conference had gone viral, but he knew the war was not over. It was changing shape, getting quieter, sharper. He returned to his study, turned off the lights, and sat alone with the quiet hum of Noah's baby monitor in the background. The pliers that drew blood will now carve truth into stone. The room was silent as the video played. Darren's voice, smug and cold, echoed through the speakers. "You think your degrees and your science make you untouchable?" Then came the cry, sharp, sudden, unmistakably that of a wounded infant. A collective gasp swept through the hall like a wave crashing against stone. Journalists froze mid-note, camera flashes stilled, and even Aerosable's PR team, poised at the edge of the platform, visibly flinched. Marcus stood steady behind the podium, Noah in his arms, the child's small hand wrapped in a white gauze that peeked out beneath his tiny jacket sleeve. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The truth had just spoken for him. Questions erupted seconds later, a cacophony of overlapping voices. "Dr. Elian, will you press charges? Is this part of a broader pattern at Aerosable? Is your son okay?" Aerosable's spokesperson, a man named Harold Lenz in a sleek gray suit, stepped up quickly, raising both palms in a gesture of calm. "Let's not rush to judgment," he insisted, voice tight with corporate polish. "This footage is being taken out of context. The situation is more nuanced." "No, it's not," a new voice interrupted, trembling but clear. All heads turned as Milo Wren, the young junior attendant, emerged from the side of the hall. He looked out of place, shirt slightly wrinkled, hands clenched at his sides, but his eyes were focused, fixed on Marcus. Then, slowly, he stepped up to the microphone. "He told me to cover for him," Milo said, voice cracking with nerves but steady in conviction. He said, if I didn't back his story, I'd lose my job. I didn't know what to do, but I saw what happened. He hurt that child. It wasn't an accident. The room erupted again, this time not in questions but in cries of outrage. Reporters surged forward. Cameras spun toward Milo. Behind them, AeroSable executives turned pale, some whispering to each other frantically. Harold Lenz backed away from the podium, adjusting his tie with a shaking hand. For Marcus, the moment landed like a quiet exhale, a temporary release of pressure, but not peace. Within an hour, the news looped across every major broadcast. Flight attendant exposed by fellow crew member. AeroSable in crisis. Father's press conference sparks national outcry. The airline scrambled into damage control, announcing the suspension of multiple high-ranking officials and the formation of an independent review board. Darren's name was now a household stain. But to Marcus, the win felt brittle. Truth had broken through, but so had danger. That evening, as dusk fell, Marcus returned home. The house, nestled just outside the city, had always been a place of calm. But as he stepped out of the car with Noah asleep on his shoulder, a creeping unease settled in his chest. He chalked it up to adrenaline, to exhaustion, to the day's emotional weight. But it lingered. He placed Noah gently in his crib and turned on the baby monitor. The child stirred slightly, then fell back into peaceful sleep. Marcus stared at him for a long moment, soft breathing, bandaged hand resting beside his cheek before turning away. "You think this is over?" Darren muttered, voice trembling not from fear, but from rage. "You think you ruined me." "You haven't seen ruined yet." His hand slowly moved into frame, and there it was, the pliers. Cleaned, polished, glinting faintly in the low light like a trophy. He rested them on the table beside him with disturbing gentleness, as if placing a cherished keepsake. "I kept them," he whispered, grinning. "They were mine before this started, and they'll be mine when it ends." Marcus's pulse pounded. His grip on the edge of his desk tightened as the seconds crawled. He knew what this was. Not a breakdown, not a cry for help. It was a promise. Without hesitating, Marcus forwarded the video to his encrypted legal channel and then dialed the local authorities. His voice was calm, direct. "I received a credible threat from a former employee of AeroSable. He's already under investigation for injuring a child mid-flight. He's shown intent to escalate. I need immediate protection and tracking." The response chilled him more than the video. "I'm sorry, Dr. Elian," the officer said over the line, his tone more procedural than concerned. "The suspect is no longer under our jurisdiction." AeroSable filed a corporate restriction order. They've classified the matter as an internal personnel issue, due to the absence of a formal criminal conviction. We suggest you contact their internal security team. Marcus slowly lowered the phone. His jaw locked. His mind raced, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was protection. They're shielding him. He turned to Elias, who had been reviewing evidence from his tablet across the room. Marcus slid the video over. "They're hiding him," he said. Elias's face hardened as he watched. "They're not just hiding him," he murmured. "They're using their own internal comms network." "That sender address?" AeroSable's Tier 3 proxy loop. "You only get access to that through back-end admin." "You're sure?" Marcus asked, though the answer was already evident in Elias's eyes. "I built surveillance filters for this type of masking," Elias said grimly. "This isn't some rogue ex-employee acting alone. Someone with clearance is protecting him, maybe even feeding him." Marcus stood in the middle of the room, Noah's soft breathing audible from the bassinet beside the couch. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he spoke. "I'm not letting this die in darkness. Not with sealed files, not with staged leaks. not with polite suggestions to stay quiet. He picked up the case folder from the table, every time-stamped image, every frame of video, every recording, then looked at the glass cabinet where the blood-stained teething cloth had been stored in a sealed pouch. "I'm holding a press conference," he said. Elias raised an eyebrow. "You'll be painting a target on your back." "I already have one," Marcus replied. "Might as well make it big enough to see." The preparations began immediately. They contacted reporters with integrity, ones who had refused to publish Aerosable's carefully managed PR narrative. Journalists from independent platforms, regional media, and human rights groups. Within 48 hours, a neutral venue was secured, a clean, transparent auditorium at a university hall equipped with live stream support and open press access. No filters, no edits. As Marcus stood behind the podium, flanked only by Elias and Milo off to the side, the tension was palpable. The audience sat in murmured silence, journalists shifting in seats, notepads ready, lenses trained. The back wall was lined with screens showing images already cued, the time-stamped injury photos, the transcript from the cabin, the audio files. Everything was ready. Marcus adjusted the mic. In his left arm, Noah slept, a soft cast still wrapped around his healing thumb. The sight of it, fragile but brave, made several photographers lower their cameras out of sheer instinct. A child was not supposed to be part of this, and yet he was the reason for all of it. Marcus cleared his throat. "I didn't come here to accuse," he began, voice steady, eyes scanning the crowd. "I came to reveal." He tapped the console beside him. The speakers filled with a crisp, unaltered voice. Darren's. Taunting. Mocking. Threatening. The room stiffened. Gasps cut through the tension like snapped wires. Faces turned, eyes wide. And then came the cry. Noah's cry. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. Marcus let it play for several seconds before pausing the audio. "That," he said, "is the sound of a truth they tried to bury." Before anyone could react, Milo stepped forward. Elias moved aside, letting him speak. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice held. Elias placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "We don't back down. Not now. But it's not just me," Marcus said, looking down at Noah's tiny hand, still wrapped in gauze. "They're trying to erase what happened to him." To cover it all, Elias's jaw clenched. "Then we make sure they can't." They started with Milo. The junior attendant had disappeared into silence since the emergency landing. Calls to his listed number went unanswered. But Elias, ever resourceful, tracked him to a quiet apartment in the outskirts of Rensfield, where he was staying with his cousin. When Milo opened the door and saw them, his face drained of color. "I shouldn't be talking to you," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "You already did," Elias replied calmly, stepping into the narrow hallway. "And now it's about finishing what you started." Milo's eyes darted nervously. "They came to me. Aerosable Security. Said if I talked, I'd lose my job. Said my family could get hurt." Marcus stepped forward, voice steady but quiet. "And if you don't, what happens to the next passenger they target?" "The next child?" There was a long silence. Milo's hands trembled. Then, with a slight nod, he let them in. In the days that followed, Marcus and Elias assembled a team. A civil rights attorney named Devin Rake, an aviation regulation specialist named Grant Wells, and a retired journalist named Orrin Latch, known for exposing the Kelsbridge transportation scandal a decade earlier. Each man, seasoned and principled, understood that they weren't just taking on a corporation. They were entering a war of attrition against a system designed to exhaust the truth into silence. Documents began to surface. Orrin pulled flight maintenance logs that had been altered. Grant dug into FAA filings and found that Aerosable had paid off 2 safety fines the year prior, fines that had mysteriously vanished from the record. Devin filed a motion demanding full passenger lists and cabin security access logs from Flight Ravelin 309. Each step forward revealed another brick in the wall of corruption. But with every move, the airline responded. Marcus's personal email was flooded with spam, thousands of messages a minute, crashing his servers. Social media bots flooded comment sections with insults and misinformation. Anonymous calls came to his university's board, suggesting questionable conduct in his past research trials. Then came the letter, delivered in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, one typed sentence: "Withdraw now, or your past becomes our canvas." Marcus handed the letter to Elias. They're not just protecting Darren. They're protecting themselves. Elias looked up, eyes steel hard. Then we expose the whole house. They arranged a secure video call with Milo. Devon guided him through what his testimony would mean, legally and personally. Milo hesitated, tears in his voice. They said they'd ruin me. They will try, Devon said, but if you stand with us, you won't be standing alone. Milo nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, listening again to the recording Elias had captured on board, the voice of Darren Voss whispering cruel taunts, the infant's cry, the click of the pliers. He played it again, and again. Each time his resolve deepened. He opened a new folder on his encrypted drive. Title: Phase 2, Uprising. From that moment on, it was no longer just about proving innocence. It was about dismantling the entire system that allowed this kind of abuse to thrive, unchallenged. The next day, Oren called with an update. Aerosable's internal memo just leaked. They knew about Darren's previous infractions. They covered them up. Marcus didn't flinch. He stared out the window of Elias's apartment, where the sky was streaked with morning red. Then we burn their lies with daylight, he said. And just like that, the game changed. The man they tried to bury had become the architect of their reckoning. When lies form an empire, truth becomes its greatest rebel. The video had arrived without a subject line, without a sender name, just a cold, silent intrusion into his inbox at 2:11 a.m. He'd almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something about the sender address, an alphanumeric mess followed by a domain that looked eerily close to an internal Aerosable code, stopped him. He clicked play. The video was grainy but clear enough. Darren sat hunched at a table in a dimly lit room, the shadows dancing behind him like coiled smoke. His eyes were wild, unblinking, swollen slightly as if from stress or obsession. He looked nothing like the clean-cut flight attendant who once strutted through the aisle with fake authority. Now, he looked like a man untethered. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores themes of racism, cruelty, and the consequences of dehumanizing others. Its purpose is to raise awareness, provoke reflection, and inspire empathy, justice, and accountability in the face of prejudice and abuse of power.